All right, I have 12:15, so we're going to go ahead and get started so we can give our speaker as much time as possible. So welcome again, and thank you all for joining us. If you're joining us on Zoom, welcome, or joining us today on Facebook. Welcome again to our webinar on what's function got to do with it, behavior and its impact on your child's education. My name is Stephanie McLaughlin, and I am the Training and Evaluation Specialist with Partners Resource Network. Partners Resource Network is the nonprofit agency that operates the Texas statewide network of parent training and information centers, or PTIs. PTIs are funded through the Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs. And throughout Texas, we have 4 projects known as PACT, PATH, PEN, and TEAM. And our mission here at Partners Resource Network is to empower and support Texas families and individuals impacted by disabilities or special healthcare needs. Also joining me today from Partners Resource Network is our Director of Statewide Services, Christina Henning, our Support Specialist, Chelsea Rivas, and our Technology Specialist, Zach Hidalgo. If you're having any technical difficulties today, please reach out to Zach in the chat box and he can assist you with those. And for those of you who are needing a certificate of attendance, you will be receiving an email to thank you for attending today's webinar. You can follow the link in the email to get your certificate of attendance. If you have a question, we will have a question and answer time at the end of the presentation. If you're joining us on Zoom, please put your question in the Q&A box. If you're joining us on Facebook, please type your questions in the comments section. A recording of today's webinar will be available on our website at prntexas.org, as well as our Facebook page. So without further ado, let me introduce our speaker. Laura Kern, JD, PhD, is a research associate professor in the Department of Child and Family Studies at the University of South Florida within the Florida Center for Inclusive Communities, a university center for excellence in developmental disabilities. She works closely with the National Technical Assistance Center on positive behavior interventions and supports. A parent of a child with disabilities, Laura recently served in the family seat for the Association for Positive Behavior Support. Prior to entering the field of special education, Laura was a practicing attorney for over a decade. Thank you so much for joining us, and I'm going to let you share your screen and take it over from here. Let me move this down. And I'll turn it over to you.
Okay, can you see? I'm going to go to play from start. Can you guys see that?
Yes, it looks great.
All righty. So, the only thing I wanted to add about my kind of journey in special ed was I really had no idea I would get into this field. When my son was diagnosed with autism, developmental disabilities in preschool, I went to that first IEP meeting, and the jargon and all of the language, I was so lost that I started taking classes. And eventually, years later, ended up going into a PhD program. And a lot of it had to do with I just didn't know what some of these words were. So part of what really drives me in this field is to work with parents and to try to demystify some of the technical language that's used, so that way when you're talking to schools, you kind of are getting on that. We want to have engagement, authentic collaboration, but it's hard when they're using different words. So hopefully by the end of this presentation, I'll give you a little bit of ideas of what some of the behavior stuff that they're talking about in schools at the IEP meetings, to help give you a little bit better ways to ask questions to be on that same playing field as that professional team, because I don't want anybody to experience what I experienced at that first IEP meeting. Even just IEPs are crazy. So what we're going to talk about is the role of behavior for your kid and this concept of what's function, or what I think about the why of why people are doing certain behaviors. And then I have a couple of a resource that we developed as part of the PBIS Center on questions to ask your school team if you have behavior concerns. So I'll share that resource at the end, but we'll go through a couple of those just to, again, give you ways to work with the team. So if you could just share who's here today. I'm assuming family members, and I consider myself one of them, our teachers, school administrators, others. If you could just put it in the chat, and then if you guys can share who's here. This presentation, I designed it for families, but if you are joining and you're not a family member of a kid with a disability, please think about how you can use this material. And I'm happy to share some of the slides if it's helpful to work with families going forward.
So Dr. Kern, we've got someone here that's with CASA. We've got parents, we've got parent liaisons, another
Awesome.
parent. So it looks like we've got a lot of parents here today.
Awesome. Okay, so that's great because that's who I really was hoping would join. And of course everybody else, but that is awesome. So you are at the right place then. Okay. So the other question I want to start out with is, so when you think about behavior, what role do you think behavior plays? We often think of it like communication. Maybe somebody needs to get something, a student or your kid. If you're frustrated, my son used to, when he was really little, he was nonverbal and he would bite himself. He was so frustrated. And that was a behavior I wanted to stop, but it was really because he was so frustrated with what was going on around him. Are there any other ideas you have of what role? If you could type that in the chat, and I'll just wait a couple of seconds and share out if anybody has others. And if you think of any as we're going forward, feel free to keep putting them in if something is strikes you.
Somebody said social skills, sensory needs, communication.
Yep. Yep. Sensory, that's a big one. I didn't know what that was until I had a kid with autism. And I now know what sensory needs are and how they play. And then
Someone said it's learned.
Yep. Yep.
To distract.
Yeah, these are all good ones. And I don't think that there is a bad or good. And that's one of the points that I wanted to make, is that we don't want to say a behavior is bad or good. It's more of, what is it doing? How is it helping the student or your kid? What role is it playing versus that's a bad behavior, a bad kid, or a good kid? So I like the fact that those words weren't coming out, and it's okay if it is, but think more of behavior as something that somebody is doing, and it's not bad or good. It's just that it serves a need for that person. So I'm going to talk about a little bit about function-based support, which is something you might have heard in schools, the idea of function. And we're going to keep it more overall broad, just so you have some talking tips, and try not to get super technical on it. There are other ways to think about behavior. I have drank the Kool-Aid of function and applied behavior analysis and PBIS, positive behavior intervention and support. However, with my son, I've also tried cognitive behavior therapy. We've had different therapists with psychoed backgrounds. So I've tried multiple ways to think about behavior and his social emotional needs. For this one, we're going to focus more on function-based support. But just to be aware that to me that there are other modalities of how to think about behavior. So why should we care? One of the things is if we start thinking about behavior instead of bad or good, that we can think about why is it occurring? And when we look at that behavior, we can take a better guess if we think about this function or why that would help us figure out what to do and how to maybe avoid triggering the behavior to begin with. And we also know that when they've done research in schools, that when they use this function-based support to address student behavior, students are benefiting and they're having better academic outcomes and better, I don't want to say quality of life because we haven't really measured that, but they have better outcomes in school. So it's something that we really want to think about. This is kind of as complicated as we're going to get about it. So we think about all behavior serves as a function or that why. So children try to get or obtain what they want, which could be an activity, it could be an item. Think about like tickets within schools, or sometimes if we're potty training, we might use a candy or something and hope that the kid will learn how to potty train. And then when they do it, we give them that candy. It might be attention, social attention, could be from their friends, could be from adults, or sensory, that they really are seeking or avoiding something that like if they wear clothes without tags, that kind of sensory. They're also trying to avoid or escape what they do not want. So something that could also be activities, items, attention, or sensory could be they're trying to get away from it. So they could be trying to get to that, use that behavior to get something, or use the behavior to avoid or escape something. This isn't just kids, this is adults. And we use this on animals and training. So this type of general ideas apply for many different types of behaviors. I'm going to use this diagram a couple times throughout. So if we think about, we have the problem behavior, we have that obtain, get something, or escape, avoid, and it could be for sensory, social, which should be attention, and activity. And for social attention, it could be from adult or peer. And I borrowed this from the PBIS Center. So just to think of that through, we're going to talk about that a couple times. The other thing to think about function and behavior is that behavior doesn't occur in a vacuum. There's usually something that's going on that happens that triggers the behavior, what happens before the behavior, and then often there's something that happens after. So when we think about behavior with this applied behavior analysis PBIS lens, we think about the behavior itself, describing that, describing what happens before, and describing what happens after. And if you want to use technical terms, it's antecedent behavior consequence. For our purposes, it's just before the behavior and then after. So I want to talk about Jeremy for a second. So Jeremy, I'm hoping you guys can relate to this because this, like, probably my son is Ryan. I probably could have put Ryan in there, but then he gets all annoyed that I use his name. But we're standing in line at the grocery store trying to check out, and we're in that line, that line that has the candy on either sides. Jeremy wants candy. Parent does not give the candy. Jeremy starts having a temper tantrum, cries, throws his head back. I'm thinking of a little one for this one. The family member has a huge carriage of groceries and no other time to shop. They've got people in the line around them. The cashier is staring. Somebody's muttering, "When I had a kid, that never happened," etc. So what do we usually do in that situation? Forget, we're not thinking about function. We are caught and it's the first time and this has happened to us. You could add to the chat, but I'm going to show a little visual. Often what happens, Jeremy's going to get that candy. The family member is going to get the groceries and get out of that store, right? So what happens the next time we go to the store and Jeremy sees the candy? If you want to fill in the chat I'll take 15 seconds. What do you think is going to happen next time? And then also, how do we feel as a family member as this is going on?
Someone said the same thing's going to happen next time.
Yeah, which is which is like dreading. And it's like, what do you do, right? So if we break this down into that kind of that function, the why and the before, during, and after, all right, you are in a line with candy with a cart full of groceries. That's what's happening. Your child is tantrums, cries loudly, shakes their head side to side. People around you make comments and stare. And after the child gets the candy, you get the food, and the shopping is done. But now we might have created a behavior pattern that's going to make it hard for you to go back to the store. And if we think about that diagram, what's happening is that Jeremy wanted to gain something, which was an actual item, right? And that was why his behavior is occurring. How about the family member, right? They want to get something, they want to get those groceries, and um, that's going to make it more likely that they're going to let the child cry and get out of the store. And then also for an adult, and sometimes for a kid, but for an adult, they're trying to escape that negative social attention from peers, right? Like that's an awkward situation that you don't necessarily want to be in. So if you start thinking about behaviors in that one, you can start seeing that there are reasons that that temper tantrum is happening, and that the adult reaction of giving them the candy and getting out of the store, you can see how that might happen. So what are some things you could do? Because I hate leaving people hanging on it. You could power through, right? And let the kid tantrum it out, which is really, really tough. And I wouldn't necessarily advise that as the first one. You could buy the candy and give it, one second, I'm getting blocked by the faces. You could pick a candy-free line. So think about that one. That one is you're changing what's happening before, right? So you're not triggering the behavior. You could plan ahead and talk to Jeremy before you go shopping, develop depending on, can he understand that, etc. Like, this is what it's like to go shopping. You might even want to practice what that would look like. You can have another item in your purse or your pocket, and before you get to that line, you can give him a lollipop so he already has the item. You could have something in the car and explain, if you don't cry in line when you get to the car, we have something. There's all different approaches that you could use to try to address that behavior. And if you think about this, the option one, which is you let them cry it out, the child gets no candy, you get the food and shopping done, but you have a headache, and it's not a pleasant situation, right? The option two, which is you pick a line that has no candy, right? So you change what's happening before the child doesn't get the candy, and you get that food and shopping done. Or again, option three, and a lot of times this is what we hope to see in school, is that you remind the kid what you want them to do in line. You stand in line, you have the cart full, and when they don't have that temper tantrum, they don't get the candy, you get the shopping done, and then you might give them something in the car to reinforce, hey, that was really great behavior that I saw, and I asked you to do that and you didn't, and this is really great. So that's kind of, those two approaches are a little bit more of what a school might do, is change the before if they can, and then change what happens after. So the other thing I wanted to just have you be aware of is that if you try to cry it out, and this goes for crying it out at night or anything where you just try to let them power through, often it's really, really hard. And if the child's temper gets more, escalates, and then you give the candy, you've just taught the child that going from 3 to 5, if I'm at 5, I'm going to get the candy. So you might actually make the behavior worse if you can't handle the crying it out. So just be careful about that one. Ignoring is a great idea until you can't ignore it anymore. And then the other thing is sometimes we have a really great plan and we're all excited and the kid is not crying anymore. And then you go to the store and the behavior starts again. So we know that sometimes behavior will stop, but then it comes back again. So we just be aware. And then what happens then is that it's okay. You just have to pause and say, what worked last time? Try that. And if it doesn't, try something else. And you notice that there's not one right answer. It can depend on how you feel as a parent, what you're comfortable with. And sometimes again, it takes trial and error. And I'm using behaviors that are not as danger. If it's danger, obviously that's a different situation than a temper tantrum in a store for candy. So I have one more example before going on, but I'm going to pause for a second and see if anybody has any questions over that one.
If you have any questions, you can type them in the Q&A box if you're joining us on Zoom. And if you're on Facebook, you can type them in the comments.
Okay. If there are any questions, feel free to interrupt.
Not seeing anything right now.
Okay, awesome. So I'm going to have another example. And this, the pictures I found were little kids, and so I used that example, but you can think of it happening with older kids with some of this. So you're taking Cassie to the playground. She wants to go on the swings. She loves to play with other kids, and you're excited to bring her there, right? It's a pleasant experience for you. But when you get to the playground this particular time, it's a beautiful day like I have outside right now in the fall. And there are lots of kids there, right? It was a day off and it's full. Swings are full. That's her favorite thing to do. She's got to wait. When another kid gets off the swing, Cassie's frustrated at waiting and she pushes the kid in front of her and gets that swing first. Both kids end up crying. So what just happened there? So if we break this down again, we got a busy playground, swings are full. Cassie pushes someone out of her way. So this one is a little bit different, right? Because we have a little bit of aggression going on here, and that's behavior that we don't want to see at home or at school, right? And she's getting the swing. The kid cries, and someone might get hurt, and lots of things going on there. So that's not a behavior that we want to see happen. If we think about what's happening, right? She wants to get something and it's an activity, it's swinging on the swing. We can think about, okay, we understand why that's happening. We might not be happy with it, but we can understand why. Let's say we've tried some techniques and taught her some social skills about waiting in line, and she's been doing a really, really great job. But you go to swing, you go to anything that someone has to wait for, Disney or anything like that. And instead of pushing, she looks at that kid in front of her and says, hey, points to the kid and says, hey, your shoes are ugly, or something about what they're wearing. The kid is upset, runs away. Cassie gets to swing. And now she's also getting other kids in line laughing, right? So it's the same type of thing. She's not using aggression, but now she's using teasing. The other kids are running away. And again, what is she learning is a good way to get that swing. The same thing, right? She's teasing. That's the behavior now. And she's getting the swing, but she's also getting other kids laughing. So when we think about that, we're getting, she wants something, right? And it's an activity, the swing, but she's also wants the social attention from her friends. So that one is a little bit more complicated. And when you're working with schools or you're working at home, sometimes you have to think, are there multiple reasons why these behaviors are happening? And do we have to kind of think a little bit, what is the real reason? Is it really to get the friend's attention? Is it really the swings? What happens in other settings? Is it just the swings? Does she do the same thing if she's waiting in line for the slides? And I mean, you could think of all sorts of different things that you want to kind of think. So if you try something and you're thinking it's just about the swings and it doesn't work, are there other reasons why that behavior might be occurring? So again, other options that you can try here, you can pull Cassie out of line, not get on the swing, or if it's a teenager, get the kid home and say, hey, you're not going to do that activity. You could teach Cassie how to wait in line. You could pick another area on the playground to try and see if it's just the swings. You could turn around and go home. You could practice what to do in line. You could have Cassie apologize, so you can have her maybe get some attention from the peers by showing more what the behavior you want to see. And any other ideas on what we could do with Cassie on either the pushing or the teasing? And any questions on that one? Okay.
Don't
So
see anything in the chat or Q&A just yet.
okay. So the takeaway on that is that we should think about why the behaviors are occurring versus saying it's bad behavior, it's good behavior, but more, what is the role that that behavior is taking? And can we think about how do we define that behavior? What's happening after? Can we take away what's triggering the behavior? And can we think about what's happening after? Can we take away or give a better way for them to get the same item that's not going to create a problem in a school or at home or anything like that? So with that being said, that's as technical as we're going to get, and we're going to go through a couple of things that if you were looking at schools, where does this kind of come in? So a lot of times when we talk about function in schools, we talk about a functional behavior assessment, which is a way to assess and consider that reason of a behavior using the same kind of logic we were doing just now. You might have observations, interviews, or other tools to think about what happens before, after, and that behavior. And then once the school has identified what could be functions, they kind of hypothesize this. They ideally would create a behavior support plan, behavior intervention plan, PBIS plan, whatever is used in your area to work on strategies that address that function. It can be on its own. Sometimes it goes along with an IEP, and ideally that FBA would guide that BIP. The reason, because if we don't know why the behavior is occurring, we can try all sorts of strategies, but they might not work. And as you saw with that behaviors that had, the teasing that might get social and might get that swing or the item, it can get a little complicated. So sometimes you have to have multiple strategies depending on how that behavior looks. The other thing I just want to mention is that sometimes what happens at home is a contextually appropriate behavior. I don't want to say bad or good, but is not something you want to see at school. So sometimes, even if you kind of have an idea of why the behavior is occurring, it's good to have a conversation with your school about that. So you can kind of back and forth of, well, they do this at home, it's not a big deal, but I can see why it might be a problem in school. So sometimes having that conversation can help. So briefly, because I'm keeping track of the time, we came up with this at the PBIS Center. We came up with this document on what can families do to kind of have schools start thinking more about function and get more family input by asking questions. So we think about kind of three different types of behavior problems. You have initial concerns that you're starting to see behaviors. You're seeing this has been happening for a while and I really want to have more stuff done. And then this is more significant. We've got some aggression. We've got lots of office discipline. We've got suspensions, and we're thinking we need a functional behavior assessment. So it kind of, the way that we set up this guide is multiple type of questions that get more intense as you're noticing the behaviors. But overall, the big things that we want you to think about is that you check in, you say, hey, I have concerns, and I want to talk about IEP progress. I'm concerned about behaviors. This is what I'm seeing. I have certain patterns. I don't understand why that would happen. Do you see patterns? How is Jeremy behaving at recess? How are they behaving in math class? How about, in the high school assemblies? What is happening at that school? And ask about data, not just, well, we think it's okay, etc. Well, you say, well, what does that look like? For example, I had a concern about my son in recess. So I asked them, how's he doing at recess? Is he playing with others? Right. And that was a behavior I wanted to see, playing with others. And the school said, oh, he must be doing fine. No one's complaining. So I said, well, what does that mean? Like, how often is he playing with others? Like, what does that look like? And somebody actually went out and just for a couple days took some observation data at how many times he went up and asked a friend, and a friend asked him to play. So then when we had the conversation of how is he doing at recess, he actually was doing really well. But I could say, like, well, I feel better knowing that we were talking about actual data versus somebody saying, well, I think he's okay because he's not getting in trouble. You ask about supports, what's in place, and then what is the school expectation? So again, that idea of like, what do you want this behavior to look like at school versus what I see at home? Ask about evidence. If they say something is going to work, what does that mean? Like, is there any research behind it? How do you know that what you're suggesting would actually change the behaviors we're seeing that we don't want to see? Ask about staff support, and ask about what's the best way for me to share my feedback if I see something that I want to share. Sometimes we forget to do that, and it could be that the teacher says, hey, I want you to use the school database system, or it's helpful if you email me. Like, establishing that, and for you to share how you would like to have that feedback can also help, so it's not just you're getting the call when there's a real problem. In the interest of time, I'm going to go through this pretty quickly because I do want to leave some time for questions. This is a kid with significant behaviors, lots of aggression, especially during hallways. And as a parent, you notice that she's got a daily progress report and she's late to class and skipping math. So now you're really concerned. And this is more severe behavior. So you're thinking maybe I need an FBA. So if you think about that, I've got slides on what are things that we can ask our teacher? Like, how do we kind of role play this before going in and asking the teacher? So, hello, teacher, how's my child doing? Are they meeting the school's expectations? How are their goals progressing? If they have a behavior support plan, how is that working? So those are that type of more scripted responses. If you practice those are more likely to get that conversation going. Asking about patterns. Have these behaviors occurred before? Are they occurring more? What times are they occurring? Asking about data. Can you be specific? Like that playground example I told you about. Are observations needed? Are there behavior support skills, interviews, etc.? You don't even need to know what some of these are, but the question is to trigger the school. Think about what I was talking about. The behavior is you're asking for help. The trigger is that you're hoping that that school will start doing more. Who's involved with this? So who's going to collect the data? Is it a paraprofessional? Have they been working with a special educator? How are you going to have that information? Am I supposed to be involved with this? Do you think we need to change their IEP? Do they need a behavior support plan? Should we collect more data? Are there other strategies that we need? And what will we do? Do we need to do a functional behavior assessment? Do we need to add social skills lessons? Do we need to work with peers? self-regulation, these type of things. I think you'd be surprised if you ask for more specific and you show that you've Googled some of this and you have an idea of what some of these things are, you're more likely to get some sort of responses from schools, because you're not just saying, hey, I'm concerned about behavior. I'm concerned and I want to know, what are we going to do about it and how are we going to collect that data? Ask about evidence. What is there data? Is there information about this? How will we know that it's better, right? So I have a situation where I'm working with a parent and they had supports, individualized supports for their kid all the way through. Now the kid is in 5th grade and those supports are gone. And the school told the kid that he's all better. He doesn't need any more counseling or anything like that. And they haven't told the parent. So that's not an ideal way, right? So now I'm telling the parent, you have to go back and ask, what does it mean that he's all better? Like, how do you know? What's the behavior? How do we know that we're all set here? And then next steps. How can I contact you again? When can we contact? When can we set a meeting? Get a little bit more precise on that information. And then the wrap up and follow through. I think it's helpful to say thank you for meeting with me, have that email and have that, try to increase that opportunities, have a good relationship. Again, checking in. And if questions aren't answered, you ask again. How long? Do you prefer email? Like you have to be a little bit of a squeaky wheel on this, especially when you're thinking about more significant behaviors. So I'm just going to show a couple of resources, again, trying to keep some time for the end. This was the resource on questions for families to consider, and I have the links here, and that goes through the different types of behavior and gives you some prompted questions to ask that are more likely to get the school to start doing something. These are resources for schools. I include that. I wasn't sure who was going to show today, but it's also good, I think, for families to read ways that they can actually participate more, especially as we get into some of this function-based thing. You know, there are certain interview questions, etc., that if you know that schools are more likely to ask, you can already start participating in that. And then finally, one of the things I do as a parent, my first step is to go to the Center for Parent Information Resources, which I know is connected with all the PTIs. And there's some really great resources, 3 pages that I found quickly on in different languages, etc., on different things you can do to address behavior. Sample letters, for schools, but there's also checklists that if somebody gives you a behavior support plan that you can look at and say, is this a good plan? And web pages and all sorts of resources. So just to know that that's out there for you. And then that's it. Any questions? I know it was a fast and furious information on function and support and what to do. So if there are any questions, I think maybe I could stop share. Would that work?
Yes, you can stop sharing and we'll take questions. As a reminder, if you're joining us on Zoom, please put your questions in the Q&A box. And if you're joining us on Facebook, you can put them in the comments. All right, this is a really great question. Somebody said, if a behavior is happening at home only, biting, hitting, whatever the behavior might be, but the behavior is not happening at school, would it be appropriate to ask the school for help with that?
That is a good question. And what I would say is that one's a tricky one, because I dealt with that where I had behaviors at home. And again, the early years were really particularly tough. He would be potty trained at school. He was literally smearing poop at home. And I'd be like, we got a real problem here, right? And the school's answer was, well, that's happening at home, but at school, it's fine and great. I think what I would do in that one is I would still go back and talk to the school and ask, say, hey, I'm seeing these behaviors, but you guys aren't seeing them at recess or areas where he or she might be showing them. Are there strategies you're using at school that maybe would work at home? And maybe maybe ask the questions from the angle of what's working at school that I might be able to do at home, which might then start the conversation, right? And then if you start the conversation, instead of them saying, no, we can't deal with home stuff, you're asking about school stuff. And then they might say, well, we have resources though that might work for you at home, and send those resources. So kind of back ending that. I don't know if that helps, but that sometimes was a way that I was able to get my resources, but still make it look like it was a school problem.
Absolutely. We have a comment, not a question, but a comment that it's important to get feedback from a variety of school staff and not just a few, to take a look at more people that are seeing behaviors and their thoughts on that.
That's a fabulous comment, because if we think about who our kids are encountering through the day, and again, that behavior can be showing up in the cafeteria but not in one classroom. It's good to have that ideas of where are we seeing the behavior, where are we not seeing the behavior, and what other people are seeing. That's a great comment.
We have somebody asking for any resources or information on how to manage behaviors that are triggered by kind of rigidity and a need for perfectionism.
Yes. I don't I don't have a fabulous answer at this, but what I think sometimes works with the rigidity is there is a sense of control. And sometimes if you build in choice making, that kind of can help with, and you design the choices. So if it's a homework, do you want to do this homework or this one, and have them kind of choose, and I'm not having a great example, but I would try to incorporate choice making, but I would also have it be two choices that are equally acceptable. So if you're talking about you want the kid to do laundry, would you like to do the laundry before supper or before you go to bed? So you're still getting the laundry done, but you're letting them choose. And sometimes when I call it, my son, I think this is actually from an intervention, rock brain. He'd get rock brain and he would not be able to move. But if I offered two choices and he then felt he could do a choice, that sometimes helped him do something. The other thing you could do is what's called, we call it behavior momentum. You can ask them to do a preferred something that they like to do, that they do well, and then ask them to do the thing that's harder after, because once they start engaging with you or doing like homework or something, they're more likely to keep doing it. Sometimes I do that when I have like something really hard. I'll do something that's easier. I'll check email, and then that will help me get the harder thing done.
Absolutely. So we have somebody asking, could you request that a behavior specialist or somebody else provide more one-on-one support for a child until behaviors change?
Yes. So it's a little bit complicated. That gets into that kind of supports question. So a school might not say, hey, we're going to assign a paraprofessional or somebody a one-on-one aid. I think sometimes, depending on the behavior, you kind of have to rev up to that. Have them try out different options before asking for the one-on-one. But if it is in general an individualized need, and it's not assessed as part of the IEP, and it's a behavior that's impacting their education, you also can ask for an IEP meeting to start saying, hey, we have a behavior and it's not being addressed. We need to have more assessments. Even if it's not annual, we need to have more assessments and have more information, because we might have to put it into our IEP and start having goals on it. So there's multiple ways to address that question. I don't know if that was helpful.
Right. As a reminder, please put your questions in the Q&A box so we can make sure we catch all of those. Checking Facebook and seeing if we have one on there as well. Okay, there was something in one of the slides that mentioned something about how you could like reduce the supports. So could you speak a little bit more about kind of reducing supports as behavior improves?
Sure. So that's a big one. So we call it fading supports, right? And often we have these behavior support plans, and once the behavior is not showing, it's hard for us to pull back, right? Because it's working. And especially if it's aggression or behaviors we really don't want to see, it's really hard to pull back. Um, there are in behavior support plans, there are ways to do that, to get to the behaviors you want to see. Sometimes you can have it gets really technical. Sometimes you can have accommodations that might help take the place of the behavior. So if the behavior plan says taking a break, right, you might have it within an accommodation on your IEP that they get to take a break. And then you start teaching them how to ask for taking a break. So versus the teacher saying, it's part of the behavior support plan and we have all the structure around it, you start having it be part of the IEP in a different place and then teach the kid how to ask for it. So then they start taking over, and then hopefully they're able to recognize the need of when they need to take a break. So it can get complicated. I would suggest asking that explicitly of your school team if they have an intense behavior support plan. What are our plans on fading out when it's working? What can we do so that my child can be independent and not require all of this additional support? Because when they leave school, I want to see them be able to really do well and not have it be because they have an intense plan in place that's not going to follow them after school.
Okay, we have someone asking, what do you recommend or what are some options when the child chooses the punishment over not stopping the behavior?
So I would say take a look at the punishment, because sometimes what we find is we think that it is a punishment, but if it's what the kid is working for, it's probably not a punishment. And sometimes we see this, especially when kids are trying to avoid an activity, right? They don't want to go to the social party, whatever. And you say, well, if you don't go to the social party, you're going to spend time in your room, right? Or you're showing this behavior in class, we're going to send you down to the office. And what's happening is that punishment of going to the office or going to your room is giving the kid what they actually want. And they might not be able to even recognize it, is that they want to escape from the social activity, or they want escape from an academic ask or something like that. So sometimes when the punishment is showing the behavior is continuing, it might actually be the reason why the behavior is there to begin with. Gets a little complicated, but just try out something else then.
All right. So another question, how could an FBA kind of look at school refusal? And then how would that inform the development of the behavior intervention plan for school refusal?
Yeah, so that is a big one, and we're seeing more and more of that post-COVID, because as some of my son's friends said, well, we did pretty fine online. Why do we have to go to school? Like, why is school there to begin with? Um, that's a hard one. And I don't know if I have a really good answer here, but I would say that what what are they getting outside of school that they're not getting in school? Is there a way that if they're interested in a certain activity, like video games at home, is there a video game club at school? Can you make that school the reason? If you can think about why are they not going to the school, can we think about that reason and see if we can balance it at school and make school more welcoming or involved or something like that. If they're getting out of work assignments at school, maybe you say, okay, you're home, but you still have to get your homework done. You're going to have to work with school because that could escalate a behavior pretty quickly. But having those conversations of why is the kid not wanting to be at school? Are they trying to avoid school? Are they trying to avoid work, etc., and not keeping that behavior really effective at home. But that's one that's getting more complicated. And I would totally, if you have a good relationship with your school, have a conversation of what they think, why the kid is not going to school, what you think, and see if you can kind of tease out some of that behavior and come up with alternatives, either that before to try not to trigger it, or after that they're not getting what they want by getting out of school.
Absolutely. As a reminder, if you're joining us on Zoom, you can put your questions in the Q&A box. And if you're joining us on Facebook, you can put them in the comments section. We're going to wait just a moment and see if there are any more questions.
And these are all really, really great questions. I hope that I answered some of them, but I will say, hopefully that if you have a relationship with your school and the team, that you're able to go and talk to them. And then I would also say, I don't know what kind of support the PTIs do, but I've always felt that when I had a problem, I was able to reach out to other parents. I was on list feeds, and what would you do in this situation? Be okay that if you make a mistake, as long as everybody's safe, that it's okay. We're going to have a bunch of fails, and that's what we learn, and then try to change the patterns again, because we also have behaviors that are happening. But do you want to add if there's any resources for afterwards if somebody has it?
Absolutely. And so as the Parent Training and Information Center for Texas, you can reach out to us. We have regional coordinators located all across the state that are able to help you and provide resources and answer questions that you have. So reach out to us. Our contact information will be on the screen in just a moment, and you can always reach out to us. We can get you connected to the resources shared today, as well as other resources. And I see someone asking if the presentation is going to be shared. There is a PDF that you can download of the slides. You can also check out our Facebook page for the recording, as well as our website at prntexas.org. And I noticed in the chat box that Chelsea shared a link. If you are not in Texas, you can go to a link and you can find other PTIs, and you can go to the link on our website to find your particular phone number for the regional coordinator in your area and their email address as well. So all of that is shared. I'm not seeing any more questions. Let me check Facebook one more time and make sure we haven't missed anything there. I think we're good there. I'm not seeing any other questions. Oh, here we go. Resources to help a parent advocate for their child at school.
I think I would go for I had included a whole bunch of from the PTIs, and I'm always impressed with what they have in there. I probably would do that. And I'll tell you, I do Google searches all the time. When I don't know, I'm Google searching and finding out, and then that sometimes will lead me to other resources, etc. So if you have specific questions, definitely, if you have access to the internet, that is an assumption I shouldn't be making, but if you're on here, you probably have access. But yeah, I would do that. And I really think that the resources that the parent centers have are really fabulous. I would not, believe me, I would not advocate for them if I did not think they were good. But they go through panels, and they're my first source for a lot of my parent questions.
Absolutely. I'm not seeing any more questions, so we're going to go ahead and wrap up for today. Again, Dr. Kern, thank you so much for your information that you shared to help make understanding the function of behavior and the purpose of functional behavioral assessment clear. And I loved your examples that really kind of helped clear that up for us. So thank you so much for that information. Really appreciate it. Let me share my screen one more time as we're wrapping up. One more time, just want to say thank you to everyone for joining us. I hope that this webinar was as useful for you as it is for us. And as a reminder, the recording of our webinar will be available on our website at prntexas.org, as well as our Facebook page. And for those of you that are needing a certificate of attendance, you will be receiving an email to thank you for attending today's webinar. If you joined us through Zoom, you can follow the link in that email to get your certificate of attendance. On the screen also is our toll-free number and our website as well. We do have a couple of upcoming events that I want to share with you. So this is part of our multi-agency collaborative webinar series, Knowledge is Power. And so we have a collaborative partnership for this webinar series with Disability Rights Texas, West Texas A&M University Center for Learning Disabilities, the University of Kansas, of course, the University of South Florida, and the Florida Center for Inclusive Communities. And we also have Texas A&M University AgriLife Extension and Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities, and CADRE, the Center for Appropriate Dispute Resolution in Special Education. And we're so thankful to all of our partners on this series. Coming up next in the series on October 29th, so next week, we have Let's Chat. Communication strategies are key with Dr. Morgan Foster from Texas A&M AgriLife Extension and Texas Council for Developmental Disabilities. And then we're going to be wrapping up this series on November 12th with Resolving Conflicts Constructively. Informed Parents Make Informed Choices with Dr. Timothy Hedin, the CADRE Senior Consultant. So be sure and check out those last two, and you can catch any of the previous in the series on our Facebook page and on our website. All right, on the screen right now is contact information for our Director of Statewide Services, Christina, our support specialist, Chelsea, and myself. Please be sure to check out our website, again, prntexas.org. We have information on upcoming webinars in your regions, as well as lots of information for parents. You can like and follow us on Facebook and on X at prntexas. Thank you again for joining us. Seeing lots of thank yous in the comments and the questions and answers, Dr. Kern. So thank you again for joining us.
Thanks for having me. If I have any questions, shoot them my way. I might not know, but I have resources.
Absolutely. We love the information that you shared today and love the work that you do through the Technical Assistance Center on Positive Behavior Intervention. We really appreciate all that you do there at the National Center on PBIS. Thank you all for joining us and have a wonderful day.